In 2014, J.J. Watt had one of the single greatest seasons by any player at any position in NFL history. In 16 games, he had 20.5 sacks, 59 solo tackles, recorded 10 passes defense, caused 4 forced fumbles, had a 45-yard fumble recovery return for a touchdown, and an 80-yard pick six. That stat line on its own is MVP worthy. But now consider the fact that Watt also played on the offensive side of the ball that year, and would end up scoring more receiving touchdowns than stars like Davante Adams. Instead of awarding this historic season with an MVP award, the NFL's voters decided to take their usual course of action, and give Aaron Rodgers his second MVP for an undeniably efficient, but generally unremarkable season when compared to his other MVP seasons. Don't get me wrong. A-Rod did have a great year with his 38 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and 112.2 passer rating, but when viewed in retrospect and compared with other MVPs and MVP candidates pre and post 2014, it's kind of forgettable. In 2014, he didn't lead the league in passing yards, passer rating, completion percentage, or touchdown passes. He didn't break or set any records, and he suffered an embarrassing collapse against Seattle in the NFC Championship. An MVP award for J.J. Watt's 2014 season would have meant so much more in the history books of the NFL, as he could have been the first defensive player to win the MVP since LT in 1986. The dogma of the modern NFL forces people to believe that the MVP is an offensive award, and this lazy line of thinking allowed a once-in-a-lifetime performance to fade into obscurity, with the only consolation being a unanimous Defensive Player of the Year award. Welcome to the show. I'm Joey Riccatelli, and let's get into why J.J. Watt was robbed of the 2014 MVP award. The 2014 MVP controversy is something that has been debated to some extent, but not to the degree that it deserves. First things first, we need to acknowledge that Aaron Rodgers' performance in 2014 was indeed exceptional. Make no mistake, as a player I love Aaron Rodgers, and there's no denying his toughness and his will to win when he's on the field. 38 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions is remarkable, and Rodgers' performance would carry the Packers that season to a 12-4 record with an eventual stop at the NFC Championship. However, they did need a little help to get past the Cowboys in the divisional. Throughout the season, Rodgers did what he always does: extend the play, make world-class throws look effortless, and egg on the Packer faithful with his customary smugness. All of this was impressive, but as we previously discussed, Rodgers didn't actually lead the league in any of the major passing categories. Drew Brees led the league in yards with 4,952. Andrew Luck led the league in touchdowns with 40. Granted, he threw 16 interceptions. And Tony Romo had the best passer rating at 113.2, while also boasting a better completion percentage at 69.9% and tallying 34 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. So the question remains, what aspect of Aaron Rodgers' 2014 season was so MVP worthy? What was it that made him separate so far from his peers in the eyes of the voters? Rodgers' season was undoubtedly efficient, but it was not monumental the way that Peyton Manning's 2013 was, Cam Newton's 2015, or Rodgers' 2020 MVP season. To put the MVP award into context, the previous season, Peyton Manning took home the honors after passing for 5,477 yards and 55 touchdowns, both records at the time, and the touchdown record still stands. And this is more along the lines of what we think of when we think of an MVP: record-breaking or jaw-droppingly dominant. To me, the MVP is the player who you can plug into any roster across the NFL and still see the same dominant output, no matter what the surrounding cast might look like. And we rarely think of quarterback this way, even though they're the single position who relies the most on the surrounding cast performance for them to be efficient. Remember when Tom Brady looked washed in his final year in New England? And then the next year in Tampa Bay, with his new surrounding cast of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, he was right back in the MVP conversation and won a Super Bowl. If you're not a quarterback, you have to be a running back who is a god amongst men to win an MVP. Within the past 15 years, the only non-quarterback player to win an MVP award was Adrian Peterson, and he had to rush not just for 2,000 yards, but also within 9 yards of Eric Dickerson's rushing record to make that happen. In Chris Johnson's case, he rushed for 2,006 yards and 14 touchdowns and didn't receive a single MVP vote. Instead, the MVP was given to Peyton Manning for throwing 33 touchdowns to 16 interceptions. It happened to Derrick Henry too in 2020, 2,027 yards rushing and 17 touchdowns for 0 MVP votes. At least this time when Aaron Rodgers won again, he threw for 48 touchdowns and just 5 interceptions. But still, how are we undervaluing these performances so egregiously that you get 0 MVP votes after rushing for 2,000 yards? When it comes to running backs, receivers, or defenders, we demand that they break some sort of absurd record to even get a vote. But when it comes to quarterbacks, we'll happily default to the most efficient guy. And this is not to say that as a quarterback you should have to break records to win an MVP, or that as a rusher, if you rush for 2,000 yards, you should win one. However, it is to say that the NFL's voters have been ignoring unbelievable performances because a quarterback's value in the modern game has become so high, even though it's the easiest time to play quarterback in NFL history. Tom Brady reflected on this too.
Like, a quarterback should only throw the ball to certain places because your receiver is in danger of getting hit. Every hard hit is a penalty on the defense. So I feel like they penalize defensive players for offensive mistakes. That can throw my receiver into any coverage and not have any repercussion for it. The only thing they're going to do is they're actually going to blame the defensive player for making a good, solid hit, and now the defensive player is going to feel like, oh, I can't do that, even though I feel like it was an offensive mistake. So in the end, I think it's a really disservice to the sport, because the sport isn't being played at a high level like I believe that it once was.
We need to dive deeper into J.J. Watt's 2014 season, but first, let's make the case against defenders winning an MVP and stay in line with the commonly shared narrative. Since 1957, only 2 defensive players have been named MVP: Alan Page in 1971 and Lawrence Taylor in 1986. Every other title has been awarded to either a quarterback or running back, with the only outlier being Mark Moseley, a kicker for the Washington Redskins during a shortened strike season. It makes sense that the award would go to a player at a position who controls the ball for the majority of the game. Whenever a running back wins the award, it's usually because they have the type of season where they get 20 to 30 carries per game. That's probably why a receiver has never won the award. Even in the most prolific seasons, receivers just aren't catching the ball even 10 times a game. Cooper Kupp received 1 vote after his 2021 Triple Crown performance, and Calvin Johnson received 0 when he originally crushed the receiving yards record in 2012. In that case, he had the unfortunate luck of going off the same year AP almost broke the rushing record. When we consider all of this, it makes some sense. Quarterback is the hardest position in sports. No doubt about it, I don't want you to think that I'm arguing otherwise. But Watt's 2014 season showed a level of dominance that we've never seen before and might never see again. There was no one on the field more valuable than J.J. Watt in 2014. If J.J. Watt had only made noise in the sack column, you could argue that it was just another great pass rushing season, but J.J.'s contribution on the defensive side of the ball was felt as a pass rusher, run defender, and pass defender that year. Watt had 20.5 sacks, 59 solo tackles, a league best 29 tackles for loss, 10 pass knockdowns, 4 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries, a 45-yard fumble recovery return for touchdown, and an 80-yard pick six. This guy ran 80 yards in the other direction at 6'5", 290 and wasn't caught. In the final 5 weeks of the season alone, he recorded 11 sacks, 2 pass knockdowns, and 2 forced fumbles. If he had only played on the defensive side of the ball in 2014, it still would have been enough to get him into the MVP conversation, but what he did on the offensive end pushed him over the edge. The former tight end clearly had some ability to play offense, but the level at which he would go on to dominate against these NFL defenses was absurd. He caught 3 receiving touchdowns throughout the season, and didn't do it looking like an overgrown oaf. This wasn't like the fridge shooting over the goal line for a 1-yard touchdown. Watt looked like a true tight end. To put his offensive production into context, he scored as many receiving touchdowns as Zach Ertz, Luke Wilson, Brandon Cooks, and Devontae Adams. He scored more receiving touchdowns than Wes Welker, Reggie Wayne, Kyle Rudolph, Allen Robinson, Vincent Jackson, Vernon Davis, and Larry Fitzgerald. The argument against defensive players winning the MVP that most people make is that they can't have a major impact on the flow of the game. But when you're getting double teamed and recording 20.5 sacks, creating turnovers, returning those turnovers for touchdowns, and then having more offensive output in the red zone than some of the game's great players, you can't deny their value. As we previously discussed, LT was the last defensive player to win the MVP. In 1986, LT won the MVP over Dan Marino and Eric Dickerson. This was all while Marino threw 44 touchdowns. And remember, this is the old NFL with DBs committing assault on every play and no protection for the quarterback. Marino was doing things that no one had ever done before, except himself, of course. Exact stats from 1986 are hard to come by, but the Pro Football Hall of Fame site has LT's 1986 season as recording 20.5 sacks, 105 total tackles, 5 passes defensed, and 2 forced fumbles. Let's do a side-by-side comparison. Sacks, tied. Tackles, LT. Passes defensed, JJ. Forced fumbles, JJ. Fumble recoveries, JJ. Defensive touchdowns, JJ. For the remaining columns, LT has no statistics. And I think it's fair to assume that had JJ Watt recorded 2 more sacks that season and broken Michael Strahan's record on top of his amazing multi-purpose performance, he would have been named MVP while also being recognized as having the greatest single defensive season of all time. For some reason, the NFL's voters have this odd standard for non-quarterback candidates that call for records to be broken or certain markers to be hit, rather than taking a wider view of a player's overall value and impact throughout a season. JJ Watt eclipsed most of LT's defensive output in his respective season, and did so in an era where offensive tackles are far more athletic and where even hitting the quarterback the wrong way can take away those valuable sack stats. Now let's compare Marino's 1986 season, where he lost to LT, to Aaron Rodgers' 2014, where he beat JJ. Marino's season was by far and away more impressive than the NFL's other quarterbacks that season, and it happened in an extremely violent era of the NFL. Marino threw 19 more touchdowns than the second place quarterback for touchdown passes. Now consider Aaron Rodgers, who didn't lead the league in any of the major passing categories, and whose season looked relatively similar to his peers, with the only distinction being his touchdown to interception ratio. I'm not sure about you, but it doesn't make sense that Marino lost his MVP to LT, but Rodgers beat JJ Watt for his. JJ Watt did something that no one will probably ever do again with his 20.5 sacks and 5 total touchdowns. He was by far and away the best defensive player in 2014. Yet Rodgers won MVP even though he wasn't by far and away better than the league's other top quarterbacks that season. By 2014, the league had fully formed into what we see it as today. Extremely quarterback friendly, with 9 quarterbacks throwing for over 30 touchdowns. What we saw from Aaron Rodgers that year was impressively efficient, but it wasn't outstanding in the same way Marino's was compared to his competition in 1986. Very few players on either side of the ball in NFL history have had the same kind of all-around impact as JJ Watt did in the 2014 season. But because the MVP award has now become the de facto top quarterback award, it has left little spotlight for all-time performances to be remembered and immortalized. Something needs to be done to change this. I think that we should create an award for the top quarterback in the league and call it the Tom Brady Award or the Joe Montana Award, the same way we now have the Jim Brown Award for the winner of the rushing title. The MVP award should be opened up to more position groups than just quarterback and the odd running back who destroys a record or comes within yards of breaking one. Of course, when we get record-breaking performances from quarterbacks like Mahomes' 2022 season, Lamar Jackson's 2020, Peyton Manning's 2013, or Cam Newton's 2015, the award should go to them almost unanimously. But when we see a once-in-a-generation performance like JJ Watt's 2014 season, the NFL's MVP voters need to pull back and take a moment to digest the greatness they witnessed, rather than defaulting to the most efficient quarterback for that particular year. I hope that after watching this video, you can appreciate JJ Watt's career a little bit more. What we witnessed from him is the epitome of what the game is all about. He gave his heart, soul, and body for the teams that he played for, while never making excuses and always looking to elevate his teammates and his community. I have a great hope that if the NFL could have seen the bigger picture, they would have awarded JJ Watt the 2014 MVP award. But until we return from the simple line of thinking that the MVP is a quarterback award, we'll never get to truly immortalize the superhuman performances of some of the game's greatest players. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I humbly ask that you like, comment, subscribe, and share with somebody. I'm looking to do a lot more videos like these, and please let me know who you think was the 2014 MVP.